Good morning and welcome. Thank you for coming to the second of a six-part series brought to you by the Kentucky Arts Council, Emergencies, Disasters, and the Arts. I'm Chris Cathers, Executive Director of the Kentucky Arts Council, and on behalf of the Arts Council staff and board, I want to tell you how pleased we are today for each and every one of you to be spending time with us, learning together about these important issues. Prior to today's presentation, I want to offer a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes the unique and enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous people and their traditional territory. Today, we stand on ground occupied by ancient people whose history has been lost, but whose legacy remains. The evidence of these ancient people can be seen all over Kentucky through the mounds and artifacts left behind. Today, over 170 American Indian tribes are represented by their members living and working in the Commonwealth. Let us honor those who were here and those who are here now and build on the legacy of stewardship of the land that they left for us into the seventh generation. Now I want to turn it over to the Kentucky Arts Council's Communications Director, Tom Musgrave, to get us started with today's presentation. Tom?
Thanks, Chris, and good morning, everybody. Like Chris said, I'm Tom. We're thrilled to have you with us here today. There's a great need in communities across the country to address the multitude of issues around emergencies and disasters that affect the arts field. We at the Arts Council became involved in this work following the historic and catastrophic long-track tornadoes in Western Kentucky that left in their path expansive devastation on the night of December 10th, 2021. 7 months later, on July 27th, and in the days to follow, historic and mass flooding in the Appalachian Mountains of Kentucky caused devastation and destruction in the region, again with significant repercussions for the arts community. In both instances, organizations were completely destroyed or experienced significant damage to physical structures, archives, collections, artwork, all gone in an instant. The lives and livelihood of hundreds of artists were affected by lost property, homes, studios, lost equipment, supplies, finished work, works in progress. And notwithstanding, communities that stood proud one day were gone the next. There's an extensive need for resources to navigate the aftermath of these disasters for the arts field. Today, we're going to introduce you to one of the best resources for artists in the country, the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, also known as CERF Plus. CERF Plus has been supporting craft artists for more than 30 years by providing support during difficult times. Through grants, training, and resources, CERF Plus is a conduit for safeguarding your practice as an artist. Ruby Lopez Harper, Executive Director of CERF Plus, and Cameron Baxter Lewis, Director of Grants and Programs, join us today to share resources available for American artists to safeguard their livelihood. Ruby Lopez Harper's work has included external equity strategies in field education, leadership development, local arts advancement, and cohort building for the local arts agency field, arts and culture administrators, and arts marketers. Ruby's background includes experience in supporting individual artists, community development, disaster management, economic development, cultural tourism, and public art. And Cameron Baxter Lewis is the Director of Grants and Programs at CERF Plus. In this role, he is responsible for the development, implementation, and management of CERF Plus's emergency response and readiness grants, as well as CERF Plus programs. Cameron began his career as an AmeriCorps National Civilian Community Corps member, rebuilding houses in Gulf Coast communities devastated by Hurricane Katrina. This experience inspired him to pursue a master's degree in public administration with a concentration in emergency management. Since that time, he spent more than 15 years starting complex programs in disaster recovery zones at many organizations. The information Ruby and Cameron share today is essential for artists of many disciplines. We encourage you to use this time to familiarize yourself with CERF Plus and make plans to follow up with what you learned today. As we know from experience, what you learned today, you may need tomorrow. If you have questions for any of our presenters today, please pop those in the chat throughout the presentation, and we will address them in the Q&A portion of the program. And now I'm going to turn it over to our guest.
Thank you so much. Cameron and I are both so excited to be here and also joined by Doug. I'm just going to open with some quick remarks and then we'll get started with our presentation for the day. So buenos dias, bienvenidos. Yo soy Ruby Lopez Harper, Executive Director for the CRAFT Emergency Relief Fund, more commonly known as CERF Plus. I am mestiza, third generation American con raíces en Michoacán, Mexico, land of the Mazahuas, Nahuas, Otomis, Purépechas, and Matlatzincas, also known as the Pirindas. I am brown-skinned, abled, cisgender female using the pronouns she, her, ella. I'm wearing prescription glasses and my dark brown curly hair is loose around my face and shoulders, and I'm wearing a black shirt. Today, I'm calling in from the unceded lands of the Nakoch Tank, currently known as Silver Spring, Maryland. I honor and celebrate all the Indigenous communities, their elders past and present, as well as future generations. I honor the generations of displaced and enslaved people that built and continue to build the country that we occupy today. Since our activities are being shared digitally over the internet, I acknowledge the legacy of colonization embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. I am using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many Indigenous communities. I want to give credit to Adrian Wong of Spiderweb Show in Ontario, Canada, who was the author of the Virtual Space Acknowledgement, and to the individuals in my life and circles who continue to inspire examination of practice, responsibility, and language. In closing these opening remarks, I invite you to explore, examine, experience, and support Indigenous communities in your area and in your history. Thank you. So to get started today, I'm super excited to share a little bit about who the CRAFT Emergency Relief Fund is. And then Cameron will be sharing a little bit about some services, programs, opportunities that are available. And then we're very excited to have Doug with us today to share a little bit about his personal experience, both in the recovery of and through a disaster. So with that, I'm going to drop in the chat box a link for you if you want to follow along or explore as I'm talking. I know folks have different ways of learning and experiencing. I won't be doing a slideshow at this point, but I'll go ahead and get started. So in 1985, as was mentioned, the CRAFT Emergency Relief Fund came into being as a recognition of the inherent generosity within the craft community, knowing that artists would often pass the hat to support one another at post-emergency, post-experience that would disrupted their practice and ability to generate their livelihood. CRAFT Emergency Relief Fund was a way to formalize and operationalize that community support. And so in 2022, I joined the organization in November, filling the shoes of longtime Executive Director Cornelia Carey, and really coming in and understanding that we have 4 general areas where we produce our work: emergency relief, advocacy, readiness, and recovery. So I'm going to talk just briefly about those 4 areas, and then I'll be passing it to Cameron again to share a little bit more detail. So when it comes to emergency relief work, we award $3,000 grants for materials-based craft and folk traditional artists who experience a recent career-threatening emergency, such as an illness, an accident, fire, or climate-related disaster. So as many of you know, with the flooding that took place in Kentucky and the surrounding area, a lot of artists were affected in terms of damage to their equipment, their property, their supplies, their inventory, and we were able to provide some relief in that regard. In other areas across the country, certainly we've responded to hurricanes, tornadoes, but also, illnesses, personal injury, and accidents, unexpected things that have taken place. So it's been one of the standard hallmarks of the work that we do and the support that we provide, specifically to craft artists, but also part of the role that we play inside the larger disaster management practice in the arts and culture field. We also are very active in the readiness realm. Readiness is one of the ways that we can mitigate the impact and the need for and the resources that are then needed and depleted as we go into the emergency relief process. So with readiness, it's really around getting information out to individual artists, specifically in the craft field, on how to safeguard their practice, things to think about so that they can ensure stability and ensure quick response, quick access to resources, make sure that information is out there, not just about the services and supports that we provide, but also what's available in the larger landscape of disaster relief, recovery, and response. Through that, we do a number of these types of educational webinars where we'll spend time with individual artist groups, both specifically craft related, but also more broadly, just individual artists in communities, sharing information around safeguarding, what to think about when it comes to insurance, how to navigate risk assessment, things to do in the wake of a disaster. But also we have Get Ready grants, which provide funding for individual artists to incorporate and to upgrade and to sometimes enhance the safety equipment and safety mechanisms that they have related to their practice. Our two main preparedness resources that we have available through our website is our Studio Protector and the Insurance Hub, which answers a lot of questions and directs you to places where you can access insurance and get more information. The third leg of the table, if you will, is our advocacy work. We often find ourselves in conversation around federal policy that is individual artist friendly. So we work with a number of colleagues through the cultural advocacy group and also other peers in the arts and culture sector to ensure that when federal legislation is being considered, that when federal policy is being updated, that there are voices who are advocating on behalf of individual artists with a particular, for us, focus on the impact to craft artists. We've also done some work in relation to the Indian Arts and Crafts Board commenting that's happening right now in terms of updates that they have going on. And so we really try to stay both aware and active. In 2022, in February, we submitted written testimony to the U.S. House of Representatives Small Business Committee to ensure that the outline of the nature of arts businesses included the ability for individual artists to participate, explaining where and why these businesses fall through the cracks in the existing federal and state policies, specifically at that point related to COVID relief. And we also continue to advocate for recommendations for future actions and programs to build a better safety net for independent workers. And the last leg on the table is our recovery work. So, whoops, I just lost my place. There we go. And so in terms of recovery, we believe in proximity and getting on the ground, building those relationships, not just in the wake of a disaster, but in the lead up to those disasters happening. We know that climate-related disasters happen on a cyclical basis, and ensuring that we have established relationships like the relationship that we have and treasure with the Kentucky Arts Council, so that when the time comes and it requires us to be on the ground, meeting the artists that were affected, visiting the places, so that we're able to build better advocacy efforts around the need for continued resources, the need for continued access, and how else can we be bringing resources to the table in support of the community. We have done numerous on-site visits as part of the recovery work, also with our efforts in Puerto Rico. And so the recovery process for us is really about building trust within the community and also understanding the long-term effect of recovery when it comes related to disaster in particular, but also on the individual, how that process works and what we can do to be better support and be better advocates for the support structures around us. So in the recovery process, that's the role that we play. Any questions before I pass it to Cameron? I know it's like drinking out of a fire hose, but we will be answering questions at the end of the session as well. So if anything comes to mind as you're continuing to listen to the information that we're sharing, please pop those in the chat box, and we'll make sure that we catch those for you. Also, feel free to hang on to them, and when we have our Q&A at the end, that'll be a great time to bring those up. I also want to take a moment to say that if you have questions as they come up later in time, if you're having conversations with your fellow artists and something comes up, don't hesitate to reach out. We are so happy to hear from artists and provide information. If you attend a weekly meeting with fellow artists, if you all gather at a coffee shop and we're able to join you, we'd love to do that and provide this type of an educational resource for the artists that you interact with as well. So thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Cameron.
Great, and thank you, Ruby. Thank you to Kentucky Arts Council for having us here today. I'm Cameron Baxter Lewis, the Director of Programs and Grants at the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, otherwise known as CERF Plus. I'm a white-skinned cisgendered male that uses the pronouns he, him, and his. I am wearing prescription glasses with short to medium brown hair and a blue and red checkered shirt. I'm joining you today from North Carolina, which is home to the Occaneechi, Lumbee, Cohari, Aliwasaponi, Eastern Band of Cherokee, Meherrin, Tuscarora, Saponi, and Waccamaw-Siouan nations, along with many other indigenous peoples living in both tribal homeland and urban settings. North Carolina is home to the largest indigenous population east of the Mississippi River. We acknowledge and give thanks to the first people of this land and their descendants, and extend our gratitude for their stewardship of the land. I am also coming to you from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, so it's important for me to acknowledge the ongoing effects of colonization, forced removals, and the erasure of Indigenous peoples' history. We commit to learning from and amplifying Indigenous voices and supporting Native communities and working towards justice and equity. I'm going to do a quick shuffle to share my screen. So be patient with me for just 1 second. You might see your face. Okay. All right. So Ruby did a really great overview of CERF Plus, and she started to dig in a little bit about our grants. I'm going to elaborate on those just a little bit more, talk about our online protector, and then we're going to dig into some pretty dense topics regarding safeguarding your studio in practice. So CERF Plus, as Ruby mentioned, really began with their emergency relief program. They used to pass a hat at craft shows for folks who they heard were having a difficult time. That program has grown and is now $3,000 for artists and craft disciplines who have a range of different emergencies. It could be theft, they could be injury, they could be illness, they could be a disaster, or they could be a combination of emergencies that are adversely affecting their ability to create work or potentially earn income. So that program operates year-round. Craft artists can apply at any time, and we're pretty fast about turnaround. If we have all of the application materials, typically we can award those grants within approximately 2 weeks or so. So very fast program. Out of that emergency relief work sprung our Get Ready activities, which Ruby was mentioning. They're $500 for craft artists to conduct activities that will safeguard their studios, protect their careers, or prepare for emergencies. You can see a list of some of those activities on our website. Our next cycle of the Get Ready program will begin this fall. I encourage you, if you are a craft artist or if you know craft artists, to consider applying. Likely it's going to be the first or second week of October, but you can go to our homepage and sign up for updates, and you will receive an email notifying you exactly when that opens. But really great program, and really the thought of it is we'd like to prepare artists before an emergency. And then lastly, I do want to mention our Gifts in Kind program, which are relationships that CERF Plus has with businesses and manufacturers and show promoters and publishers who donate to artists who have experienced an emergency. And those donations could be materials or tools. They could be free subscriptions. They could be free booth space. They look like different things depending on the relationship, but really kind of help give an extra boost to artists that are in a tough spot. So all of our grants and programs are on our website. Please feel free to go and check those out. I have to click through 3 times to get through this one. This is our Studio Protector guide. Really amazing resource that helps develop a more individualized and personalized plan for artists to protect themselves. Its best feature, in my opinion, is that it just has really a strong library of resources for artists. And today we're going to be talking about a little bit about business continuity. We're going to talk a little bit about planning, but really today we're going to be starting to turn the wheels in your mind about how to think about preparedness. And once you're ready to take it to that next level, I encourage you to check out our Studio Protector guide. And within that, you will find resources and videos and checklists that will help you craft a very strong plan for yourself. So before we even get into professional preparedness, I think it's important that we have a conversation around personal preparedness. I've referenced ready.gov as a resource that you can check out. What I like about ready.gov is it's easy to navigate and it's a good amount of information without feeling overwhelming. There are many other preparedness websites out there that you can also check out. But really the gist of it is you want to think about the steps you would take to make a preparedness plan for yourself. And I'm going to talk through a few of those steps with you. The first thing you want to consider is how are you going to get information about what's going on in your area. There's something called a WEA, which is a wireless emergency alert. What those are trusted messages through local, state, or federal connections that will tell you what's going on in your area. And those WEAs can come up on your phone. You may already be receiving these. Today, I went in my phone and checked to see which ones were enabled. And if you have an iPhone, you can go into your notification setting, scroll down to the bottom. It will show government alerts, which I never realized it did. And from there, you could select having an Amber alert on, having emergency alerts on, having emergency tests on, and you can enable different settings so that you're able to get information in real time that may be impacting you with where you're located. And those basically connect to local cell towers so that they geolocate to where you are. If you are not a phones person, which is fine, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, has a radio station that they are constantly providing local updates on weather. I personally also have a weather radio, which is battery powered, just in case my power goes out and all the towers go down. I can flip to the channel for my local area that's created by NOAA and find out what's going on. So the first step is being aware of what's happening around you and receiving as much warning as possible ahead of time. The second step you want to consider is your shelter plan. And there's really 2 components of that. The first of which is what happens if you have to shelter in place, meaning whether that's in your home, where are you going to go in your house? Are you going to do anything to safeguard the room that you go into? Is there anyone that you need to consider bringing with you in the shelter in your home, whether that's pets, whether that's children, whether that's family? Is thinking about what part of your house you would meet at if you had to shelter in place, meaning you had little warning to evacuate and there was something happening. You also want to consider that for other places you may frequently visit, for example, your workplace. Where would you go within your workplace to be safe if something was going on? So first part is sheltering at home. The second part is, what if you need to leave or evacuate? There is a number you can text. It's 43362. You can type the word shelter with your zip code, and that's a program administered through FEMA, and it will notify you of all the shelters within a 200-mile radius of you that are open. So that's a great resource if you need to find a local shelter quickly. If you are not planning to go into a shelter, which are often administered by the Red Cross or state, and you're planning to visit a family member or friend, you might want to give them a heads up that that is your plan, because we all love unexpected house guests, but you might want to just cue them in that is your plan if you're going to evacuate, and tell them, ahead of time and not in the moment. So you want to figure out where and how you will shelter. And that leads us to our third point, which is evacuation. From my house, I'll give a personal example. My best evacuation is to hop on 2 main roads that get me to an interstate and then get on the 40 and leave in North Carolina. But it's very likely if there was a lot of traffic or if those roads were for any reason disrupted, I would need to have an alternate plan, in which case I would have to go through some more rural roads and kind of go around the interstate in order to get to where I needed to go. So with your evacuation route, you want to consider having alternate routes. If you're in a city, also recognize that a lot of times folks have to evacuate on foot as well, and think about where you would walk to and be realistic with your situation on where or how you would need to evacuate if you have any sort of mobility issues or you have somebody in your family who might need some additional support. So consider all of those factors with your evacuation planning. And then that brings us to our fourth point, which to me is probably the most critical, which is having a family or household communication plan. And ready.gov has a really good template about this, but consider what information your family needs to know to communicate with each other. If the cell towers go down, it's often recommended that text messages may still work. You want to let your family know that. Texting may be the only option if you're not able to get calls to go through. Also, if you have no communication, where's your meetup point? Where are you guys planning to go? And if you have small children, this is something I'm pretty passionate about. Make sure they know your name. Mommy and daddy are really not helpful if somebody's trying to reconnect your children with you. So you want them to know your first and last name, if possible, also your address and phone number. If you feel like maybe that's scary or they might not be able to remember at the time being, you could fill out a luggage tag and put that on their backpack or on some other item that they carry around, so that anybody who happens to try to connect that kid back with you will have the information they need. And the last piece I will mention is you also want to mention any critical medicines that are important for that child. And you can also have a tag for other people in your household that you consider or might need some additional support in an emergency. So again, there's really good templates, but it's a conversation that you have with your family, and it's not a one-time deal. It should be something that you plan to do annually, if not more. But you're letting each other know what the plan is, and you're having a couple of backup scenarios if things don't go as you expect. And then lastly, I'm not going to spend much time on this. This is the image you see. It's important to have an emergency preparedness kit. And I can't tell you, doing this for almost 2 decades, so many folks tell me they expected help to arrive faster than it did. And so if you ever find yourself in a situation where you are on your own longer than you expected, you want to have some sort of kit, which is essential items you need for 72 hours to survive. So you want to think about how much water you would need for 72 hours for yourself and potentially your family and or pets, how much food you will need. First aid kit is obviously great, any sort of chargers. And you want to have all of those items in a place that are pretty easy to grab if you need it. You don't want to be searching through your closet for a flashlight when you're under, a tornado warning, which could be, 10 minutes or less away. Also consider having a kit for adults as well as a child's kit that has some activities for them to do. Because if you've ever been with children that are bored and you're waiting for something, you want to have something to entertain them as well. So there's some great advice on how a children's kit can look a little bit different than an adult's. But those are 5 steps. Again, ready.gov can walk you through more information about those, but you want to have all the information in one place, as well as one thing I'd regret if I didn't mention any critical documents, passports, IDs, etc., that you might need. So that's personal preparedness. You want to take care of yourself, of course, first.
Cameron, I'm going to break in here just a moment. We have a request in the chat for you to say what the website was regarding access to shelters, to say that again. Sure. So it is, you can text the number 43362. And what you text them the word shelter, and then you put your zip code. And I played around with this earlier this morning just to test to see how it worked. And basically, you'll get a message from FEMA. It says, we're looking into this for you. We'll get back to you in a few minutes. And then a few minutes go by, and then they'll send you a list of any open shelters within 200 miles of your location.
And then Cameron, maybe at the end of your section, you can pop that number into the chat for folks to access it just as an extra.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's great idea. All right, great. So now that we've had some conversation around personal preparedness, we're going to move on to discuss professional preparedness. Before I get into that, this amazing poster that you see here was created in 2018 as part of our studio safety guide. It's downloadable, really great to throw up in a studio, just to have a sense of how to safeguard yourself from a variety of different emergencies. You can print these out. I will say, doing numerous events where we pass these out, these are often the first things to go. So check it out on our website. I just want to make a plug for it real quick before we get into this. So professional preparedness, before you even begin this journey, you want to consider doing a risk assessment. And a risk assessment is basically 2 things. It's understanding what your assets are, what's critical to your practice, and what risk you have to those assets. And so we're going to walk through some of that information here today. You're not going to have time to do all of it, but it should give you a pretty good starting point so that you can expound upon this information in some free time. So let's talk about it. First thing around assets, you want to consider your structures. So whether that's a studio space, whether that's a classroom space, whether that's some other physical structure that you conduct your practice, that's an asset that you want to consider for yourself. Secondly, things, your actual artwork, tools, equipment, technology, what things are part of your practice. Third, you want to consider people and relationships. Those can be your customers or your clients, your students, galleries, or even mentors, folks who are really critical to the work that you do. And lastly, you want to consider events. Do you go to shows to sell your work? Do you do any sort of classes, performances? Are there other events that are really important to your practice? So once you have a solid understanding of your assets and you kind of jot those down, Then you want to start thinking about your risks. And we've already talked about this a little bit with the emergency relief program. Some of the greatest risk that you want to consider your practice are disasters. If there's any sort of theft, illness or injury, an economic downturn, which is not something I would really initially think of, but coming out of the global pandemic, I would say it's probably front of mind. Any sort of technology failures you might experience. And then the last one, which is often overlooked, but very frequent is personal emergencies. So if someone in your family gets sick or there's a death in your family and you have to step away from your practice for a while, consider that a potential risk to your livelihood. So once you think about those risks and you understand your assets, you want to start thinking about scenarios where those risks will then impact that asset. So for example, if there was a flood, how would that impact your assets? How would it impact your physical structure? How would it impact the things within your studio? How would it impact the people associated, your clients, your customers? And how would it impact potentially any events that you attend to conduct your practice? I will give you a fair warning. Step 3 can feel overwhelming and kind of pessimistic, but it's an important exercise, because then on step 4, you're going to prioritize what are really the most likely scenarios that will and risks that will affect your practice. And that is going to help you understand how to craft your preparedness plan, where to focus your energy. So step 4 is starting to pull it all together and really prioritize what the greatest risks are. I will say, leading our emergency relief program for the past 4 years, we have seen many, many, many more artists on the West Coast experiencing fires and everywhere else experiencing floods than they ever anticipated. So I'm not trying to give you advice on how to create your risk assessment, but you might want to consider those two things pretty significantly. And obviously, if you're in a different geographic region that's more prone to earthquakes or tornadoes, et cetera, those are also pretty important to consider. So that is our risk assessment. Again, our online studio protector has more tools to walk you through that to develop your individualized plan, but a really helpful exercise to help when you get started down this road. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit to talk about documentation, which by documentation, we mean the what and the how. In other words, what are we documenting and how are we going to do that? One of the easiest ways to document your work, as you can see in this photo, is to use this item right here, your phone. You can take pictures of all the items that are part of your practice. And when you do that, you want to somehow capture information in the description about those items. So you consider their title, their dimensions, their price, sales record, date, the model, the value, the condition of each of those items. So you can either narrate a video with that information, or you can take a picture and label that picture accordingly. And then you can save that information in the cloud, whether that's Google Drive, whether that's Dropbox, whether that's some other system, because that will keep it safe in case you physically lose your phone. You don't want to have it all saved on there. All of those titles that I just mentioned, all of those descriptors are available on our website, so you don't have to memorize those right now. But if you're the type of person who wants to take it to the next level, which some of you may be, you might want to consider using spreadsheets. CERF Plus has a suite of spreadsheets on our website. The categories of spreadsheets we have are art inventory, equipment, sales, and consignments. That's a helpful way to organize the information a little bit more coherently. And if you're that that type of person who also wants to have a picture with the descriptors as well as the spreadsheet, then it will be so much easier for you to file insurance claims should you need to do something and should something really catastrophic happen. We see so many scenarios where folks experience home fires, and then they're supposed to go back to their insurer and have proof and remember everything that was in their home and studio. And that can feel hopeless at times. So it's a really important exercise to try to do that at the outset. If you look at our spreadsheets, and if you're not satisfied with documenting with your phone, there are also comprehensive inventory softwares out there that can range for $50 for light versions of Artwork Archive or Art Tracker to $1,000 for something like Art Stacks. So you can research some of those different softwares, see what suits your need, but also what meets your budget. And then the last thing I'm going to talk to you about today before I turn it over to Doug is business insurance. We have this nifty little guide. It's called the Guidebook for Artists. It's about a 15 to 20 minute read, and I've read it probably 10 or 15 times. I always find something new in it. It does not necessarily tell you what insurance to purchase for yourself, but it helps you understand the different types and really ultimately craft what's called a business commentary, which considers the scope of your operations and what the appropriate level of coverage would be based on that. So a couple of types of insurance I'm going to talk to you about real briefly. First, as we talked about assets, is property and building insurance, which is the physical structure. A lot of folks assume that their homeowner's policy is going to cover their studio in case something happens. That is often not the case, or if there is any coverage, it's very, very minimal. So keep that in mind if you have your studio within your home. You also want to consider business personal property, which would include the contents of that studio, whether that's tools or artwork or some other materials that could be damaged as a result of an emergency. Inland marine protects your work and property in case it's damaged or destroyed while it's in transit. And then lastly, personal property. If you do any sort of repair or conservation work, this is insurance in case something happens. Now, personal property also has limitations. If you are the one who damages somebody's artwork, you might not be covered, but if something else happens, then it could help out. So lastly, I'll talk about liability. General liability is the thing that I think many of us think about when we think of insurance in general, and it protects you in case somebody's injured on your property. And it also stays with you if you're at other locations. And there's a couple different types of liability. Product and operations liability helps you if somebody's injured by a product or while you're performing your work. Errors and omissions is a unique one. If you write or teach and someone follows your advice and gets injured, then this may protect you in case there's a lawsuit. And then lastly, there's umbrella insurance, which protects when liability is exhausted. It kicks in, and it's usually in increments of $1 million. And that's really a pretty comprehensive insurance that can help you rest better at night. And you might be surprised that the cost of something like umbrella insurance might be lower than you expect. There's tons of other insurances that we could discuss. Flood and earthquake, which are typically not covered by business insurance and require a separate policy. Workers' comp, extended business income, etc. You could check all of those out in this guidebook. But really, the takeaway is ask a lot of questions, shop around for the right insurer, see if they specialize in commercial lines of insurance, understand what sort of turnaround time they have, see who your friends are using. And there's a website called AM Best, And that website provides free ratings for insurers. So you might want to check out the insurance company against that just to get a sense of their rating. But you want to have insurance that provides the appropriate level of coverage that you feel relatively secure in. And lastly, I'll say that some insurance is better than no insurance. So keep that in mind as we see so many practice-threatening emergencies happen. Insurance is really that first line of defense. So with that, I know I spoke for a long time. I'm going to turn it over to the legend, Douglas Naselroad. Douglas has been making stringed instruments since 1969, and he's developed his own line of signature stringed instruments. They're sold all over the world. In 2012, he was selected as the Appalachian Artisan Center's Master Artist in Woodworking. He also founded the Appalachian School of Luthery, and in 2018 became the director of the Troublesome Creek Stringed Instrument, which is a company that helps folks with drug recovery learn how to make instruments. Had the honor to visit Doug, and just incredible the work that he has done. So Doug, I'm going to quit sharing my screen and turn it over to you.
Good morning. As I said, my name is Doug Naselroad. I wear prescription glasses, but I can't find them. I'm wearing a black shirt. Behind me on the wall are two paintings by Pablo Ruiz Picasso, a Spanish painter who lived from 1881 to 1973 and co-founded the Cubist movement. The more well-known picture on my right side, your left, is from his blue period. The one on my, okay, anyway, I haven't figured out what the other one is yet. That's about as far as I could go with that. But we think it's a Picasso, so it's hanging on the wall. We've had a terrible flood down here, as you may realize. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit and what it's like to go through something like that and to dig out with a community, leading a small community, actually. I'll get to that in a minute, though. The 27th of July, 2023 was a beautiful day at the Troublesome Creek Stringed Instrument Company, our factory. After lunch, a visiting Luthery student, Willow Cartier, came into the setup room and played a new mandolin I had just finished. I had a guitar on the setup bench that was about ready to be shipped out, made of Osage orange, just a golden guitar, wonderful instrument. It was a great summer day at work overall. That night, I was roused out of bed by an abrupt silence. The power had dropped suddenly. All the white noise had disappeared. The fan ceased, leaving only the soft drumming of summer rain on the roof. It was around 2:30 in the morning, and I figured that I probably had lost power because of lightning taking out a transformer somewhere. Not uncommon for Heinemann. The thought actually occurred to me that with the soothing sound of the rain, it would be a good night for sleeping. And I tried to go back to sleep. That is, tried. A sudden blast of rain came on so hard that the room vibrated, and followed by my iPhone sounding. Speaking of alerts, a flash flood warning came up really early on, and I figured it had to do with low-lying areas. Again, not that uncommon for the mountains. A fire hose the size of Heinemann blasted straight down on the roof. That's the only way I could describe it. And I thought maybe for a minute that we were having a tornado. Still without power, the street lights out. I stumbled around the apartment looking for a flashlight, and all I could find was a very small one. We have better flashlights now, big ones. The residence is located over what was the Appalachian School of Luthery on Main Street. So I threw open a front window of the bedroom, and that tiny beam of that little flashlight, it only illuminated a little square, like 2-foot square at a time. So I had to scan around in a sort of a grid pattern to see what was going on down there. Over at Jones Insurance Agency parking lot, my RAV4 was getting a free wash. It was raining hard, and I thought, well, there goes the dust off of that car. The creek down around back, typically a good 15 or 20 feet below street level, wasn't really a big worry. A robust sheet of runoff was shooting down the street between the gutters, moving quickly. If it kept up, I reasoned that, we'd probably be shoveling up the mud out of the low-lying parking lot over at the factory, because we do get that from time to time. It's happened before and likely to happen again. But that burst of rain just didn't let up. The water spread up onto the sidewalks. I ran around to a back window to look at the creek to see what was happening there. By the time I got around to the front window, I could see that the water was rising really, really rapidly. It was up on the tires of my car, and I thought, well, I better run out there and move it. But then the speed of the water just, it was too late. In fact, when I went back to the back window, I could hear the creek was rushing really hard. And I knew that something was going up, that the creek was coming up. Large things began to float down the street, shoot down the sidewalk. Trailers, things that didn't belong out on Main Street. Trash cans, of course, and always there's drink cups and, soccer balls, basketballs, things like that. When I saw furniture coming down the street that had come out of people's offices or maybe houses, I knew that we were in trouble, and it was going to be a bad day in Heinemann when the water went down. When the water went down in the morning light, we started surveying damage as soon as I could get out. The water had come up to about 5-6 feet deep in the studio below me. It covered up my car. It had destroyed the Museum of the Mountain Dulcimer. The factory, in fact, we discovered had just been savaged by hard water coming down off the mountain and the creek. Ripped through doors, smashed in windows. The museum just down the block from me, the front windows had smashed out of it. All the dulcimers went floating down the creek. Below me, the School of Luthery was just turned inside out, the same process. We lost something like, by the time we had assessed the damage, we had lost something like $330,000 worth of machinery, about 40,000 square feet of programming space, jigs, templates, finished instruments, half-finished instruments, archival material, all of our computers, all of our records. The factory was probably, in terms of money lost, the factory was probably the biggest thing. But in terms of human loss, throughout the region, of course, you all know that we lost 44 people, 17 of whom were in Knott County alone. 2 of the people who died were right here in Heinemann. And we had a couple of our employees from Troublesome Creek lost their homes. And we also had an extremely difficult time just getting around and looking at everything. The power went down, phones were in and out. For a while, it wasn't possible to charge a phone. When the phone worked, we were just wearing it out. All kinds of decisions were made on the fly. And the young lady who had come over the day before and visited the factory had come back in for her class to the School of Luthery in the morning of the flood, Willow. And she helped me literally pull debris out of windows and doors so they could be closed. We picked up instruments at literally floating down the street and began that morning the process of recovering from the flood. Although right at that point, we were just trying to rescue whatever we could. Fortunately, there weren't any people downtown that night, except just me. Everyone else, well, on my block anyway, everyone else showed up after the fact. There was a family across the street up at the church over there at the parsonage, but they were up off the creek, so they really weren't pulled into it. At one point, they asked if I wanted to be rescued, and I told them I'd rather not be. I'd just wait for the water to go down, because we're in a pretty solid building here. So structurally, our buildings were still standing, but they were reduced to shells in terms of the contents. Now, that being said, right away, we went to work trying to find supplies, shovels. I have about a dozen employees, and we are a little bit of a unique program because I work with people in recovery. And so all of my employees were also, I think, a little bit more at risk than a lot of people. I had to muster up some courage and come up with some, strong words to lead them kind of up out of this horrible situation where there was a lot of despair, a lot of upset, and we couldn't afford to dwell in it for a lot of reasons. So we started working. No one lost their job. No one ever went off the payroll because of multiple programs and projects to assist us. I was able to put them to work as disaster recovery workers through a special federal program where we worked on up into the winter, just trying to piece our home back together here. And one of the first things that we received, besides some very nice church people delivering cases of water and shovels, like I said, that kind of thing, was we were contacted by Mark Brown and in turn Cameron about the CERF Plus program for the artists. And of course, we were all beat up without resources. I personally had lost the car that I used to get down here. So we had a kind of a panic, like how do we pick up and resume life as it was. And one of the things that really helped was the fact that I was able to pretty quickly process those emergency relief grants for each one of our people here, each one of our craftsmen. And it made a difference with every single one of them in a different way. Everyone applied it according to their greatest need. And I am happy to say everyone's got a home now. Everyone's got their cars back up and running, including me. And I will parenthetically say that a wonderful person came along and donated an 86 El Camino and said, here, you drive that. And it's ludicrous. It's got chrome on it. It's cool, but it's also the company truck now. So we've had some wonderful partners emerge from this. And first and foremost, you know, I'd have to say is CERF. And Cameron, I really appreciate you, dude. I feel like I'm just rambling, so, you know, I could probably open this up to questions pretty quickly. You did mention one thing, though. I want to say this about the process. You know, it's an excruciatingly long process. We're still rebuilding, and do not, in the face of an emergency, expect things to happen quickly. Just one brick at a time. You know, that's the only way it's going to go. Substantive aid is going to take some. It's going to take some weeks and months to even for the opportunity to even appear. But that's just how it works.
Great, thank you, Doug, and thanks for sharing with us. Doug also hosted us on a visit in December and was just so gracious and really helped us understand the recovery of the area and the investment that continues to be made in the creative sector. And so I just hats off to you, Doug, for all of your hard work. It's really something.
It's a lot. It's been a lot of work. We had the comfort of knowing that this was a 1,000-year flood. It's kind of backbreaking, but at the same time, really exciting because we're gaining. We've got all new stuff, which new is good, and we've got more space with more on the way. I think we've had to build it ourselves, most of it, but more is better, and our programming has grown in ways that we don't have time for me to, you know, lay out here. But I will say that in the long run, catastrophe is an opportunity for growth. Don't ask me how that works, but it really does. So we're building back and having more fun than we thought we would have had back in July of 2022.
Okay, thank you all for your the information that you've given out, and Doug for the anecdote of what you went through there in Heinemann last July. We're opening up for questions. I don't see any in the chat yet, but do feel free to write them in there. I want to I'll throw one out myself. Our friend Molly Quinlan Hayes used the term blue sky time in one of her remarks in the chat, and I wanted to see if you all could. I'm sure some people know what it means, but I just want to see if you all can define what that is and why it's important.
Sure, and I'm happy to jump in there. It's I think it's a term that is frequently used in the emergency management sector, and it's kind of caught fire probably in the last 5 years. But blue sky essentially means that there's not a active disaster, and gray sky means that there is an active disaster. And so Molly's question was, should you text that number regarding shelters when there isn't an emergency or when there is? And the purpose of it is when there is. Although you can test it today, you can text it right now, just see what pops up, if anything. But yeah, that's a term that's frequently used for disaster scenarios and training as well.
And probably a good time to plan for these for the unexpected. There's been a lot of good information, and as Ruby pointed out earlier, it is a bit like drinking water from a fire hose as opposed to a water fountain. I like that. What is something, and I'll toss this out to the three of you. What is to come up with one thing that artists can do today or even tomorrow that's simple, that will put them on a good footing toward giving momentum to come up with a preparedness plan and to feel good about it?
Can I weigh in on this in terms of overview? Unprecedented is a word that accompanies almost every single major disaster. You should think in terms of the unprecedented in this time that we've come into. Climate change, call it what you want to, but we're experiencing situations that are not necessarily, specific to a locale. In theory, what happened here, I mean, look, anywhere you have that much rain come down that quickly, wherever you're located, you're going to have a similar disaster. It's not the topography of this town. But, if we wanted to move away from all this threat, we would have to move away from the 21st century, because that is going to follow people all around this country. And it's not a question of when it's going to happen here again. It's more of a question of where it's going to happen. And that's just flooding. But I like the word unprecedented because, it describes things which are now precedented, which have now happened. So you have to kind of, when you're doing the disaster, you can't look at a town like this and say, well, it has never flooded up this high. We never had water over here where you park your car, it's fine. Well, when you plan like that, then you lose your stuff. So my suggestion is that you try to think outside the box when it comes to what's happened in the past. That goes for things that people know have happened in the distant past, but they won't factor in day to day. I mean, you also want to look at your potential disaster and say, oh, well, maybe it'll be an earthquake. That it's not likely. And it's kind of unprecedented in our lifetimes, but it's possible because we're very close to the Madrid fault. That kind of thing, you should factor it in and get yourself some really, really good flashlights. For sure.
I love that. I think to Doug, your point, sometimes we can't think about it, right? It's beyond kind of what we can process. A quick Google search, even today, the most common natural disasters in the state of Kentucky include flooding, earthquakes, wildfires. And so I think take a half an hour, do a little bit of Googling, understand what happens in your area, and then walk your studio, walk your work area, walk your grounds, walk your home, and think about the things that may be at risk in the event of a climate related disaster. I think it's also educating yourself, is there a high crime, a high rate of theft in the area? Okay, well, what does that mean if you're a jewelry maker? What does that mean if you have expensive equipment in your garage? Are you taking measures to safeguard yourself? And so, it takes an hour if you are, really committed to doing a quick walkabout and a quick assessment, and then taking note of the things, and then setting time and making that happen. The other thing that I would also suggest is, looking at your, kind of your financial situation and make sure, it's easy to set a plan in place. It takes time and dedication to follow through on it. But what would it look like if you were able to set aside 1, 3, 6 a year of, financial reserve in the event of a disaster? Can you replace your equipment? If you didn't get the insurance, can you replace your inventory? Do you have resources to travel in the event that you need to leave the area? So just making sure that you're thinking through some of those more tactical elements of being prepared, and then activating on them, because it's not enough to think about it and it's not enough to plan a plan. You actually have to put the plan in motion and understand how it's going to work, and get in touch with folks like us. We're happy to talk through and be of assistance.
I also would like to recommend cloud storage of records. We've archived so many things that we've lost because the flood just destroyed everything that was in a filing cabinet, or right down to the checkbook. A lot of that stuff is irreplaceable, and when it comes time to do your taxes, you're really on the spot. So anything that you can store comfortably, especially anything you can store in a cloud, will be there when the dust settles or the water goes down, whatever. That, I think, in this day and age it's an important precaution all in itself, because what's really hard is, like, we don't know what happened to this invoice. We don't know what happened to these orders. We don't know what happened to these patterns. There's an awful lot of things that we spent most of this year, guesstimating back into, existence. And, going forward, there'll always be gaps, big gaps around the flood of 2022. By the way, I think I said 2023 when I started out. I apologize for that. Mental block, I guess.
That's a good point about archives, Doug, because we actually, following the flood, that has been that was a key issue and a big discussion centered around that. And it's a good reminder that emergency management personnel their first priority is to save lives. They're not to save records. So you have to, the onus is on you to make sure you've got either a digital or some alternative backup of that. I'd like to go back to the very beginning of the presentation when Ruby was talking about CERF Plus in general. And you mentioned the $3,000 grants available to folk and traditional and craft artists. What are some examples of grants that you have funded, just to give people an idea about what's available and what can help them out?
Yeah, happy to take that away. Our emergency relief grant program 5 years ago was about half the size it is today. And our largest increase in grants has been climate-related disasters. And our largest geographic increase has been Puerto Rico. So a lot of the grants we see, almost half of them are related to disasters, and whether that is a hurricane or an earthquake or much more frequently fires along the West Coast, that is definitely top of mind. But then not super far behind is illness and injury, which I think is a category that is often forgotten about. Craft artists get injured in their practice. They also experience, like all of us, pretty catastrophic illnesses, which, whether it is them that's experiencing that illness or whether that's a loved one that they've had to put their practice on hold to care for, that is also a very frequent emergency that we see. And then lastly, I'll mention theft. Ruby mentioned jewelry artists are often a victim of theft. And I think it's interesting to consider business insurance, to bring it back to the presentation, while your artwork is in transit, because we have seen jewelry makers lose hundreds of thousands of dollars of their inventory right out of their vans when they're parked to get gas. And so those are the typical categories, but there's all sorts of things that happen in people's lives that I could never anticipate. And we really just try to look at it as, is it really hurting them? Is it really adversely affecting their ability to create or potentially earn an income? So those are some typical examples that we see, but it's always a surprise.
Thank you, Cameron, for illuminating that. We appreciate it. Seeing no questions in the chat, I think it's appropriate to wrap this conversation up. It's been a good one and an important one.
Thank you.
And we're grateful to Ruby Lopez Harper, Cameron Baxter Lewis from CERF Plus, and Doug Naselroad of the Appalachian School of Lutherie and Troublesome Creek Stringed Instrument Company. We're at the Arts Council, we are very grateful for the relationship that we've developed with you in terms of moving this conversation forward about preparedness in the arts field. Just before we go, I would like to, unrelated to all this, I want to take a moment to promote the Continent to Commonwealth exhibit, traveling exhibit, which is opening today at the State Capitol in Frankfurt, and it's available for view during Capitol visiting hours. It will be traveling all over the state of Kentucky for the next year, and this unique exhibit puts a spotlight on Asian American and Pacific Islander artists who live in Kentucky. So come to Frankfurt and see that exhibit in the Capitol, or be on the lookout for when it's coming to your region of the state. Our traveling exhibits have gone from Paducah to Pikeville, and from northern Kentucky to southern Kentucky. So we're very excited about putting this one on the road. But thanks again to our guests today from CERF Plus and from Doug and Heineman, and we will sign off here. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Oh, one more thing. Sorry, we have the next in our series of webinars in the Art and Culture of Kentucky is tomorrow, Wednesday at 11. So if you haven't registered for that, you can do so by visiting the Arts Council website on the Arts Buzz up in the top left. And that will take you to a page where you can register, and that is free. So again, we will sign off here. Thank our guests, and everyone have a great day. Thank you.